Hello and welcome to Atheists Talk. My name is James Zimmerman, and today we're going to feature a two-part show, both dealing with great books to read to your children, your young children. The first part we're going to do tonight is great books to read to your children regarding religion without indoctrinating them. And our guest this evening is Mindy Rhiger. Welcome to the show, Mindy.
Thank you.
Mindy has brought along a selection of books that she's going to discuss with us. She is definitely qualified. She has a Master's of Library Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and currently she writes book reviews for Library Journal and blogs about children's books for Mothering.com. In the past, she's worked at a librarian in a public library as an editor for a reference book, and currently she is employed at a library services company where she assists school librarians choose books for their libraries. So I think that we're in good hands. Oh, and most importantly, Mindy is a mother. So she has a vested interest in this, not just from a professional or academic standpoint, but in raising her own child. So we have 10 books. We're going to see if we can cover all of them, and if we do, we even maybe have a couple more. So why don't we just start off right away. What's the first book you brought along today?
Okay, well, I don't actually have a copy of the first one.
Oh, that's right, sorry.
But the title is A Story of Religion by Betsy Maestro. And as the title suggests, it is the story of religion, how it began, how it evolved over the years. And it's very frank. It says that people wondered about things that they didn't understand, and they made up these stories to explain why things in their world happened the way they did. And it goes on to talk about the primitive religions and how they evolved into modern day religions. It covers Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I think the important thing is that no one religion is presented as any more true than any other one. It is very careful to use phrasings like Christians believe Jesus was resurrected after 3 days, and making it easy for secular families to use it, I think. It does finish on a kind of interfaith note saying all paths lead to the same place. I think it does reference God. Like it's all the same God we're worshiping, so that might be a caveat in there. But in general, it's good, I think, because it doesn't really pretend that any of them are true.
I read a review of that book online, and one elementary school librarian complained about the pantheistic conclusion of the book, saying that it's kind of trying to mix oil and water. Obviously, if somebody says, if one religion says we're going to heaven, another one says we're going to be reincarnated, they both can't be exactly paths to the same truth or the same facts. Yeah,
and it doesn't get into too many details about what they believe, so I don't know that heaven and hell are necessarily covered, even in the Christianity chapter. It's more about how it began and how, where these beliefs come from than necessarily delving in too deeply into the particular religions. And I think that would be one of the negatives of the book, is that if you do want to know a lot about, say, Christianity or Islam or something of that, like, you probably want to choose a different book, one that's just about that. I think this book in particular is good for if you want an overview, or if you want to talk about why religions exist. I think it's particularly good for that.
Yeah, well, and living in an urban area like we both do, and then we're a very pluralistic society, so I know that like my son, for example, is often asking, why do people do this? He'll see people praying at a restaurant, he'll wonder why people are flocking to a certain building one day, so maybe a good introduction. Even though we, of course, aren't raising him religious, it's a good introduction to show him why people are doing those things or why they feel they need to.
Definitely. Okay. I think one other point that I would want to bring up is that it isn't necessarily a typical nonfiction book. It's more written as a story. It's illustrated in paintings over photographs, and it isn't broken down into chapters. So it isn't necessarily easy to jump in and say, well, let's look at this information about this religion. You kind of want to read it as a book, even though it is fairly lengthy. So my next book actually is a little bit comparable to that, but more straightforward. It's One World, Many Religions by Mary Pope Osborne. And it covers basically the same ground. So that's why I kind of wanted to compare them. But it's more straightforward. It has photographic illustrations. It's broken down into chapters. If you want to read the chapter on Judaism, you can just jump right to that.
Yeah.
So it's a little more typical, more straightforward. And it does actually cover a little bit more ground. It covers the same religions that the Story of Religion did, but it also adds in Confucianism and Taoism. So you have a little bit more there.
So maybe we should have established this earlier on, but what age level are these books appropriate for?
These are both for, I would say, intermediate grades, which maybe 3 to 5, 2 to 5, can possibly stretch up or down depending on the child.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, these are definitely books that you would find in an elementary school library. I think most of the books that I have are.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I think we
age.
could say that about all the ones that I looked into at least. So.
But yeah, these are good introductions, good overviews. You know, definitely if you want something a little more detailed about one of the particular religions, you might want to go to another book that is just about that one. I think one of the issues with these overview books is that it's hard to get into detail, like the fact that, say, Christianity is so nuanced. There are lots of different beliefs within it, and it really can't get into those things.
So it's really a surface.
It is.
Look, an overview is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's an intro, and I think they really try to avoid the negatives about religion in these books, in both of them.
So they don't talk about the Crusades? Or?
They don't mention Crusades. I don't think any kind of religious wars are brought up at all. In particular, I think in One World, Many Religions, like for reincarnation is discussed in Hinduism, but heaven and hell is not discussed in Christianity, which it can be kind of confusing. I mean, if a kid is doing a report in school about religion, he might need to make a note of what they believe about the afterlife, and that isn't in there. I think perhaps they're trying to avoid a negative connotation, but you know, it suffers for it, I think.
So does either book have like a bibliography or a for further reading section?
I definitely know that One World, Many Religions does.
Okay, because if they're going to be just a topical overview, then that's a good last page to have, to say, here's where you can go now if you need more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That one is, like I said, more straightforward setup. Like it has the index and the table of contents and the more read more at the end. So that's a good one for the more straightforward nonfiction readers.
Okay. And then you have another one that I thought sounded similar to these two, called Many Ways by Shelley Rotner.
Yeah, and that one I actually do have, Many Ways by Shelley Rotner. And this is actually quite similar, but it is much simpler. It's basically a photo essay of the ways in which different religions are practiced, with only a few sentences on any given spread. And let's see, it actually won, when it came out in 2006, was listed as a notable social studies trade book, and that's something put together by Social Studies Teachers Association, picking the best books for their classrooms every year. So it has gotten some positive attention.
Yeah, is it really recent, like last decade, or?
This was 2006.
Oh, okay, yeah, so pretty new.
The focus is really on pointing out the similarities in religion and kind of celebrating diversity. Shelley Rotner actually has a number of books celebrating various types of diversity. I think she has one about the colors of people's skin. She has one about families. A few other topics that it's definitely being different is awesome, kind of, which is good. It's and this one in particular is celebrating the different ways that people believe and decide to express that belief.
Yeah, I think, again, for a very young child, that's probably a good overview because being in a non-religious family, my son sometimes just sees the oddball things that religious people sometimes do. So maybe it's good to show him, well, yeah, we don't believe what they do, but I laughed at one picture where it just showed people who looked like they were Hindu just shopping in a supermarket, as if to say, even though they're Hindu, they still have to shop for food, you know, so which might not be obvious to a small kid. They might think these people are really different or weird or who knows what they're thinking.
It tries to be realistic, which I think is especially good for young kids. They say that for say first grade and lower into preschool, the more realistic a book is, the better it is, the more they're able to comprehend it. So these photographic books are particularly good for those.
Yeah, I had well, I already said that I had it laying around the house for a few days in preparation for the show, and then my son wanted me to read it to him, and then because it's such a photographic essay, that allowed more than just the text to be discussed, because he's like, what are they doing in this picture? Well, that's a bar mitzvah, and he asked more questions, which quickly got to the extent of my knowledge about it, but I mean, it opened more doors more than just like the 10 words on each page, so.
Exactly, and that's
good.
really what these books are meant to do, is open up a discussion to see what kids already know, to talk about, you know, fill in the gaps for them, and
find out what the parents don't know.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and the next book on your list was one called Faith, right? By Maya Ajmera.
Yeah, and that's actually follows right with the book about many ways, because it's also a photo essay. It's very, very similar. Perhaps not quite as simple, but it's photos.
There's captions for each picture now.
Yeah, so we have the one big sentence and then captions for each picture trying to explain just what is going on. And there's also several pages of end notes at the end talking more about what was happening in all of the pictures, what is faith, basically it breaks faith or religion down into several attributes in the way that it's expressed. It said faith, the book, not the concept. Faith highlights the common threads that bring people together in reverence and joy. So it's really more about the expression of the faith, focusing on, say, prayer, singing, rituals, good deeds. Again, trying to open up the discussion. It does, like I say, have more information in it with the captions and the end notes, so perhaps a good choice for parents who want to brush up themselves on what's going on in all the pictures.
End notes are a good idea. I mean, I've seen other books. I haven't looked at Faith, the book, but I've seen other books like that, and I like when there's more detail for parents to read later, because the kids always do ask questions, and so it's nice if they say, what are they doing in this picture? I'd rather say something than just, I don't know. So. Right.
It also makes the book good for using with different age groups. I mean, I could read it with my 3-year-old and just read the big sentence. And, you know, you could read it with your older child and go into more detail about what's happening. And if you have multiple ages in your house, then, you know, that could be a benefit for you.
All right. Sounds good.
One thing I think
is
particularly interesting about this is the fact that it could open up a discussion. It could also open up a discussion about how we as secular families practice some of these things. Like what do we do that is similar to prayer, or what do we do that's ritualistic? What traditions do we have? Even as an activity, you could have your child take photos and arrange them in a book that models after this about what your family does. Because, you know, even though we're secular, we still come together in reverence and joy on some things. So I think it's actually an opportunity, even though it doesn't necessarily include us, we can create that inclusion.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah,
kind of
show
fun.
them that secular people still get married and still celebrate births and stuff. Okay.
We go grocery shopping like the Hindus did.
Yeah, definitely. And then your next book was one entitled "What is God?"
Yes, and I have this one as well. This is a very interesting book, and you might be tempted to pass up a book like this, saying, "Well, we don't believe in God. Why would we want to bring this up?" But it really is more made for, I think, secular families than religious families, because it has more of a pantheistic view of God that I'm not sure many religious families would be totally comfortable with.
Right, yeah.
But basically, it very briefly covers the history of religions, talking about their similarities. It talks about the fact that they have holy books, they all have certain teachers that they revere, and then moves on to the question of God, and basically says that we are all God, God is in everything, and even goes so far to say when you pray, you're praying to this idea of God and connecting with the world around you.
Very pantheistic.
Very pantheistic, yes. So, you know, it had some very interesting reviews. If you go on Amazon, there are people who very much do not like this book, which you might
I could see it really being polarizing.
Yeah.
I wondered about that when I was religious and I would see those books at bookstores and libraries, because of course our religion supplied all the books we needed to learn about God or about their doctrine. So I wondered why I wouldn't buy that book because I am religious, and I would think if someone is not religious, they wouldn't buy it because they don't care. So I wondered about books like this.
Yeah, I think that the main negative for this book would be that there is such a tiny little audience.
Yeah.
I mean, even a lot of secular families really aren't necessarily going to want to talk about God in a pantheistic way. And I mean, I think there's just a very small segment that would really be interested in a book like that. But for those that are interested in that, I think it's a perfect fit. And, you know, I'm glad that it's out there for them.
Yeah, maybe it's a tribute to the publisher for taking a chance
right,
on a possible small market. It's by Firefly Books. So, yay, Firefly Books, I guess.
Yeah.
And then you have one of my favorites, The 10th Good Thing About Barney by Judith Forst.
Yeah. Put that one up. We do have this. This is about the death of a pet. And it is very, what I think, honest and direct about what happens when we die, when a pet dies. And it actually turns into a positive thing that I think it's a cat in the book that is not going to cat heaven. That the cat is in the ground and returning to the earth and is part of the cycle. So it's, you know, learning about what happens when we die, and it's a positive thing, which I think is really good. Yeah,
it is good. I like that. I don't think it says that the cat does not go to cat heaven, but it says, well, we don't know, the father, because the child hears from a neighbor that, oh, your cat went to cat heaven, and so the child says to the father, did Barney go to cat heaven? And the father says, well, we don't know, but what we do know is this, and I mean, it's hard to argue with that, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to approach it. Like, it leaves that question alone. Like, it's okay to answer, I don't know, and I think that's a really good model for parents.
I read some reviews about that book online, and there was a 1-star review. The person hated the book, you know, so those are always the most interesting to read, even if I know that I'm going to be totally at odds with this person.
Yeah.
And I just got to read some of what they said. They said, this is not a good book if you believe in God. I really liked this book through the 9th good thing about Barney, and then it all went wrong. If this book was just 9 good things about Barney and ended after the funeral for the cat, I would recommend it. And he also goes on to say, if you believe in and are raising your children with the belief in an afterlife, this book is definitely not for you. In this book, and here's his main argument, heaven is strongly questioned and being in the ground is assured. I think it's irresponsible for a parent to choose this time at death to question the hope of an afterlife. So I just thought that was crazy because heaven forbid, well, there's a pun, heaven forbid we question heaven. It's not even saying heaven is being denied or ridiculed. It's just people are wondering about it. And then he thinks that at the time of a pet's death is a bad time to talk about the afterlife or heaven. I think when is a good time? Like when you're getting a filling or on a roller coaster? I mean, I think that's a great time. What happened to the cat, you know, or what happened to Uncle Bob, whatever.
Definitely. So. It seems to me like it's the perfect time to explore it gently, which this book does. I mean, even looking at the size of the book, it's clearly meant for sharing one-on-one with a child. It's a small size. It really seems like a really good opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, my wife first brought the book into our house when my son first was asking about death. And it turned out later one of our cats did actually die, so we read it that night again, you know, brought it back out of the dusty shelves after a year and read it again. So yeah, it has come in handy. It's the one book that you're talking about tonight that in this part of the show that actually has been personally valuable to us. So.
Actually, my next book is also about death. I don't actually have a copy of this one. It's called Goodbye Rune by Merit Kaldal. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I believe it's Norwegian. It was originally published in Europe, translated and published in the United States by Kane Miller, which takes award-winning books published around the world and republishes them in English in the United States, which they often have very unique offerings because of that.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah.
I think their most famous book is probably Everyone Poops, which was originally, I think, a Japanese title, and they published it here. But Goodbye Rune, not to get off topic, is...
Yeah, well, our poop section is next month.
Right.
So, yeah.
Is about the death of a child's friend. So it's, I think, particularly interesting in that it features the death of a child.
Yeah.
But it's very direct about what death means. I think it says, So he had died, and what that meant was that he wouldn't be able to talk anymore, or see or hear. He wouldn't be able to walk, run, or play. There's no mention of any kind of afterlife. It's more, well, he doesn't do anything anymore, and this is how I feel about it now, which, you know, is kind of a good a way for
really honest.
And for a secular family to not have to worry about the fact that it's going to mention an afterlife. One of the things I think is interesting about this book and the 10th Good Thing About Barney is that there's no way of knowing from the catalog record in the library that it talks about death but not about the afterlife. It's something you have to hear about from word of mouth,
right,
like a show like this or from your other secular friends. You know, you can't just like, I want to I want to search for this in my library. The subject headings don't exist. So I think that's why, you know, talking about books and sharing them are particularly important for topics like this that, you know, can be hard to find.
Your words are true, because I didn't know that a book like The 10th Good Thing About Barney even existed. And I think even when I saw it on the kitchen table when I got home from work that day, I was like, what is, you know, just a book about, you know, the 5 people you meet in heaven or whatever
right.
for kids. So I think you also mentioned that Goodbye Rune had good illustrations too. Not that that's the most important thing when you're talking about death, but it's a nice additive. Yeah.
Right, but it's, you know, soft and gentle in connection with the fact that it's being kind of frank in its text might be easier. So hopefully it'll be a good one to share in a difficult situation.
I'll have to get a copy of that one now. And then speaking of good illustrations, you mentioned you wanted to talk about On Noah's Ark by Jan Brett.
Yes, and now Jan Brett is, she has written many, many, many children's books on lots and lots of different topics. And this one happens to be an interesting take on the Noah's Ark story that might be of particular interest to non-believing families, because I think one review I read called it apocryphal. Just because it doesn't necessarily keep to the story exactly. For one thing, it doesn't mention God at all. It's told by, the narrator is Noah's grandchild. I think it's uncertain whether it's actually a boy or a girl.
I noticed that too when I read it last week.
Yeah, I was trying to look in the reviews to figure out, like, is it a boy or a girl? Did somebody else say? And basically it was like, either they said you can't tell, or they assumed it was a girl.
Oh, okay.
So, I don't know. So Noah's grandchild is narrating the story, who's like, well, I didn't remember that character.
Yeah.
And I think the only characters you see are Noah and the child.
Right, there's no other family, no Shem, Ham, or Japheth.
Right, so, and the focus is really kind of on the animals, and which is a great choice for a children's book. That's what the kids really want to see when they're reading about a book about animals. They want the beautiful illustrations, like point out their favorite animals. They go in. So it's kind of an interesting choice that, you know, if you're a purist, you might not particularly enjoy. Like, who's this character, and why isn't it talking about God and the fact that why the flood is happening, which it isn't covered at all. So it's just a story.
Yeah, no, I like those kind of books too, because even if you're a secular family, I mean, the Bible is so pervasive in our culture, and there are some good stories in it. So I think it's good to be knowledgeable, just like it's good to be knowledgeable about Shakespeare, even if you don't particularly like him, just because so much of our language and our terms and so much is based on it. So I think it's good to give kids an exposure to it. But I like that it's presented more like The Cat in the Hat than, you know, here's an actual fact that happened. So it's just a fun tale to read. So. Yeah,
I agree. It's definitely, I want my daughter to know, you know, some of the stories like Noah's Ark and some of the other things that are just a part of our culture. But again, it's hard to find a book, like, how do I know ahead of time that this book is about Noah's Ark but doesn't mention God or the fact that this is this horrible punishment? Because
like at a library, it would just be wedged in between two very religious books on the topic. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's good that you're mentioning them then.
Yeah. Actually, the next book is also about Noah's Ark. I guess it's actually kind of, there are a lot of picture books on Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
It's a fun topic.
It's like the greatest
hit
in Genesis.
Yeah, it is. So this is We're All in the Same Boat by Zachary Shapiro, and this is fun. Like that one, it was like a serious story of the legend but this one is like let's
kind
have
of
fun with this
irreverent.
story.
Yeah.
And it is actually written by a Jewish rabbi, which is interesting. But it kind of jumps into the fact that all these animals and Noah, and I don't believe any other human characters are in there except for Noah. They're all on this ark, and they at first are thinking, oh, this is going to be fun because we're taking a cruise.
Yeah.
But of course, the animals start to get cramped.
Yeah,
there's
kinda
not a lot
restless,
of room
yeah.
with all those animals, and so they start complaining. And another fun aspect of it is that there's alliteration and a lot of interesting vocabulary. The ants are antsy, the bees are bored, the camels are complaining, and so on throughout the entire alphabet, with a lot of fun words to, I think there's like exuberant and, other things that, kids might not know, but I think I like this one because my daughter is a kind of a language person already, which I guess
So it's genetic.
is not surprising given our family. But she loves learning about the new words.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so it was fun to go through and like, well, exuberant means this, and talk about how in the illustration the animals were showing their exuberance. And in particular, I think the hyenas were hysterical, and we talked about hysterical, and then it came up again because in the middle of the book, the climax, Noah says, we're all in the same boat, and then all the animals start to get happy again. And the hyenas were hysterical both in the beginning and the end. So we talked about how, you could be laughing hysterically, but also crying hysterically, and that's what the hyenas were doing. So there's, more opportunities than just the Bible story in this one. It's also fun and humor and vocabulary.
Yeah, that's good. We should have maybe even mentioned that earlier, because obviously the point isn't just to, when you're reading a book with your kid, it's not just to tell them the information that's in the book, but also get them interested in reading themselves too. So yeah, that's another key feature. And then we have one more book, which is good because we just have under 2 minutes here.
Oh, good. This is To Everything There Is a Season, and the words are from the Bible, so that's
I'm sorry.
that's the author. The illustrator is Jude Daly, who is from South Africa, and I think that's kind of the interesting take on this one, is that the illustrations feature a South African community going about their life. Kind of illustrating, there's a baby being born, there's animals dying, they're planting,
Time to plant, yeah.
So it goes through what is familiar to us and brings it to a life that is somewhat familiar to kids. I mean, they must know about farming communities, but also a little bit exotic. It's the South Africa. I mean, I don't imagine too many Minnesota families have a strong connection to South Africa. I don't know, but for us, it was really interesting to see, like, this is what life is like.
All right, that's actually all the time that we have.
Which is perfect, because that's it.
All right, well, if you'd like to contact us, we'll send you a copy of our latest newsletter, the Minnesota Atheist. Be in touch with us, because if you're interested in us, we're interested in you. Thanks for watching. Thanks. Bye.